Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Meira K Show, where we are going to be talking about everything happening here in Israel, including things that you probably will not see on the media. This week we've got Houthis, Hezbollah, Hamas, hostage negotiations, the budget, the reform is back, the pay for slave program, and more. So watch till the end to hear about everything that we need to talk about today. This week we're deep diving into the reform specifically. We're going to talk about everything that's going on, but I want to start with something that you're just never, ever going to see on the mainstream media. And that is the story of the soldiers who are injured, who are suffering, who are coming home, and the communities that are coming out to support them. Watch this video for a second. What you're seeing here is an injured soldier finally returning home after months of being in hospital and rehabilitation. And look, watch how the entire community comes out to support him and love him. I want to focus on this for a second because I saw another video this week, a beautiful video that was actually about a very good friend of mine's uncle, a man called Elchanan Kalmanzon. He lives in the settlement, so to speak. He lives in the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, and he went down to Be'eri, which is known as a very, very left-wing community. He went down to Be'eri on October 7th, saved hundreds of individuals, and was unfortunately killed. This week, the residents of Be'eri uprooted 5 trees and took them into this so-called settlement to rebuild them in honor of this amazing, heroic man. I think this is the story of the Jewish people that is not being told right now online and not being told in the media at all or anywhere. The story of unity, the story of people showing up, of taking care of each other. We've got injured soldiers, we've got a traumatized nation, we've got people who have died. We've got so much tragedy, and yet once again, no matter what, the Jewish people show up for each other. That's the note that we're going to be starting this episode on, because as we talk about the divides, and there are so many divides here in Israel, it's important to remember there is actually so much more that unites us. Our humanity, our love for each other, our love for this land, our love for the Jewish people, and that is the most important thing. The media does us a disservice by not focusing on it. And you will hear me say that forevermore, because I believe it with every bone in my body. We need to focus on what unites us. The media's obligation is to help and support the Jewish people and the country wherever the media may be. And it doesn't do that. It tears us apart. So keep that in mind as we deep dive right into the reform. So you all remember 2023, the protests ripping apart this nation. There were talks of a civil war, which honestly, whenever you hear the word civil war, I could almost promise you it's just not going to happen here. It's just not going to happen. But they love to propagate this idea. Civil war, everybody hates each other. The reform, the end of democracy happening here in Israel. But is that really what's going on? Because I think not. I'm going to take you on a little ride in history, going back to the beginning of the country. When it was first started, the majority of the leadership here was very left-wing. An elitist, very Ashkenazi, white group of older men led the country, and they stayed in power for about 40 years until the Yom Kippur War. The Yom Kippur War was a disaster and a tragedy that hit the nation and completely surprised everybody, and it honestly ousted the government. Because of that, the left-wing government failed, and in a surprise, incredible elections, the new right-wing prime minister came in, a man by the name of Menachem Begin. Now, I happen to be Menachem Begin's biggest fan, but he made one very, very big mistake. You know how in the United States, when a new government is brought in, not only is there a new president, but the entire bureaucracy is changed out. I mean, he nominates new people for the Supreme Court, and you have a whole new shift of people who are aligned with the president, because there's an understanding that you can't have the bureaucrats who support the Democrats working for the new Republican government and vice versa. A new president comes and an entire bureaucratic system comes in with him. Well, here in Israel, that is not how it works. Menachem Begin comes in to the government and decides, because he was such a big believer in humanity and in people listening to their leader, that he doesn't need to change out the bureaucratic system whatsoever. And so the country, and more importantly, the elite left that thought that they had lost their hold on the judiciary and on the entire bureaucratic system and on the government itself, realized that no, there's a new right-wing prime minister, but the entire left can stay within these systems. And so that's exactly what they did. There's an amazing book in Hebrew that I hope gets translated one day, which is called Lama ta matzbi'a yamin v'mekaber smol. Why you vote for the right, but actually get a left-wing government. And maybe soon we'll do a little bit of a deep dive into that book. But the gist is this understanding that although we have a right-wing government, so many of our systems are actually much more left-wing. And this, as you can imagine, is a problem that the right-wing government wanted to change in 2023 when they decided they'd have enough of the judiciary, the Supreme Court here in Israel, coming in and intervening wherever they could on every decision that the government was making. It was stopping them from being able to do the things that they believed were important, and so they wanted to put some sort of limit on that. Now, the question of balances of powers between the right and the left, between the judiciary and the government, is a complicated one because at the end of the day, the government is representative of the people. We choose them, and therefore they have our vote to make decisions. The judiciary here in Israel, however, has nothing to do with us. They self-appoint themselves. Now, it's a complicated number game because there's 9 people who appoint each other, and we'll dive into that in a second when we try and explain what the difference between the reform proposed then and what happened this week is. But basically, the Supreme Court's job is to kind of stay out of the way and make sure that things are legal. Whatever the government does is somewhat legal, and they are basically supposed to not intervene in political and security things. That is not how it works here in Israel. Our Supreme Court, which is basically a leftist elite group who choose themselves again and again and again, over-intervenes in everything that happens in our government. And so reform was proposed to try and limit their power. Again, the Supreme Court are there as a small group whose job it is to oversee but not to highly intervene in the way that our Supreme Court was. So the reform was proposed and it had 5 different components to it. We're not going to go into all of them, but they were pretty extreme. They were basically saying we are going to push the Supreme Court completely out of the government. And obviously there was pushback about it. But not only was there pushback, and now we've actually discovered that these reforms were funded by Biden and US aid, which has been finally shut down, in hopes to get rid of Bibi, which is a whole different story and a crazy one in and of itself. The left-wing group freaked out so much that they might potentially lose their power basically to veto anything that they don't like that the right-wing government does, that they started these crazy protests, again, funded by America, which is insanity. And these protests went on, and they were labeled under this idea of democracy. Now, the irony of this is that in a democracy, what happens is that the majority choose the people that they want to lead the country, and the minority have to deal with it. It's unfortunate, it's frustrating, it's really hard to watch when the majority that you don't agree with is in power, but it's also the reality. I'm sure in America, the Democrats are not happy with what the Republicans are now doing in government, and the Republicans were not happy with what the Democrats were doing when they were in government. But they were voted in by the majority, so they win the seat, and that's what they get to do. Here in Israel, however, the left decided that that's not the definition of democracy. The definition of democracy is that the Supreme Court should be allowed to say that they don't like what the government's doing and therefore get rid of it, really stepping outside their jurisdiction. So in an unbelievably ironic move, because honestly, this is just not what democracy is, the left took on these slogans, democracy, democracy, we have to get rid of Bibi, we have to get rid of Bibi. They're trying to remove the checks and balances and basically become an extremist, orthodox government. And when I say that's so far-fetched and far away from the truth, there's just no good words to even describe how drastically incorrect this was. And so that was the reform. That's where we found ourselves, with the left screaming at the government for proposing what should be a totally normal reform. I mean, if you look at the judiciary in America, it's pretty similar to what the reform is proposing. Like the Supreme Court should be somehow decided by the people in power and government, like the people who are elected choose them. That makes sense. But here, it basically was going to mean the Supreme Court, who had all this left power, despite them not being chosen, were going to lose that. And the left did not like that. Fast forward to October 7th, and now we know that Hamas were actively saying out loud, oh, look, they're fighting, they hate each other, these protests are flaring up, they're not focusing on their external enemies, we can come in and hit them. And that's what we did. And by the way, I think that's an important thing for us to remember, that when we are not united, Hamas actively tell us that that is the solution to us winning the war. The more we unite, the less they'll attack us. I mean, it's so self-explanatory, but again, the media comes and does us a massive disservice on this topic. And so the reform was postponed because we're at war and you can't keep on pushing something like this. But the Supreme Court continued to intervene in military decisions. How could the Supreme Court have any say in what our military does in political things, which, again, if you read the laws, are far out of their line. And now, again, we've seen with Ronen Bar, something we discussed last episode, they just keep on doing the same thing again and again and again. And the government decided that enough's enough. So they proposed a new reform. But this reform is not really a reform, okay? It only touches upon 1 out of the 5 topics that the previous reform touched on. How we choose the people who are going to be choosing the supreme judges. And so if you break down the way a Supreme Judge is now voted in, there are 9 people who have to choose him, okay? 3 are Supreme Court judges, 2 are lawyers, 2 are people from the Knesset, and 2 are people from the government. The whole idea right now is that the 2 lawyers who are chosen will be chosen by the government. Why? So that when you have to have a majority, there are more people from the government. If you do the math, it means 2 plus 2 plus 2 that are chosen from the government versus 3 Supreme Judges, and they shouldn't be choosing who the next judge is. That's the whole reform. It's not a big deal. It's not talking about changing the entire way the Supreme Court's chosen and limiting their power. It's not doing any of the things that the first reform did. To be honest, it's not a reform at all. It's a very, very simple step towards democracy. And so it was passed. It was passed this week in government, and the left are saying, then democracy. Again, not understanding, not even talking about what this rule is and how it's totally legitimate and fair. And the truth is, it's not enough. And that's what the right wing feel. Like, this doesn't do anything. I mean, it makes it a little bit more democratic the way that they're chosen, but it doesn't limit this big issue of the Supreme Court overreaching its bounds. Guys, this isn't a reform. It's just not a reform. It's a small change, making the Supreme Court a little less insane, but it's not a reform. And the people out there protesting, being like, this is so anti-democratic, just honestly don't understand what democracy is. It's a tantrum because they're not getting their way, and it's unfortunate, but thus is the way of the world. And so on to our next topic, where we're going to talk about other protests going on. And these protests are honestly a little bit more legitimate, and they're the hostage protests. Now, I've said from the beginning that I'm against these protests. I think they are literally us eating right into Hamas's hands, doing exactly what they want, showing so much hatred and lack of unity and pain. But the whole thing is horrible. Everything to do with the hostage negotiations is horrible. And right now, this week, there's been a little bit of a development and a move forward. Remember how 4 weeks ago, we've stopped the aid. So Hamas are kind of starving out in a way. Not really, because they still have everything that they need, but the Gazans are getting frustrated and angry. And we're starting to see internal protests in Gaza against the Hamas government, or lack thereof a government, if you get what I mean. They don't have the aid, and they see that we're really serious about negotiations, so they've offered us 5 hostages, some of which are alive and some of which are dead. And Israel said, absolutely not. We need 10 alive hostages. 10 out of 29 that we know to be alive. Israel's been offering a lot of other stuff, like billions of dollars to Hamas leadership, etc. But these protests are basically super, super angry that we've gone back to war. The hostage families are saying, we've negotiated up until this point. There is absolutely no reason for us to stop the negotiations now. And Israel's saying, we are negotiating. We are negotiating as best as we can, but we're dealing with Hamas. And the fault here is Hamas's fault. Look, there's an ongoing argument if the government have been behind stopping negotiations, or if they don't care about hostages, or if they do care about hostages. And I think it's fair to say that everybody in this country cares about the hostages. Everyone cares about them. This is just unbelievably heartbreaking. I mean, just yesterday they found bits of a hostage, but they haven't found his whole body. And so they confirmed that he had died. And that's just absolutely heartbreaking. They have released videos of hostages begging to come home, crying in the videos. It's just, the whole thing is so unbelievably painful, unbearable. But the reality is, and this is interesting because I was speaking to somebody this week who's much more left-wing than I am. And they were saying to me how everyone they know understands at this point that these protests are just not okay, and that the deal is terrible. Any sort of deal with Hamas is just unacceptable. We should just be fighting them and killing them and hurting them until they give us back what is rightfully ours. And I think that's interesting. I think it's important for us to call out the people who have been behind this evil usage of the hostage families. There's no other way to say it. This should never have been a political issue. And the people behind the reform jumped in to the Bring Them Home movement, jumped on these hostage families and tried to turn this into something so political and anti-Bibi and made it about the government instead of making it about the unity and bringing the hostages home in the way that it should have been from the very beginning. They hijacked a movement that they had no right to hijack. And it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking to watch the mothers out there hoping for a deal, screaming for a deal, and to know that Hamas are watching this. And potentially this might mean that because they're seeing mothers scream, that these kids are not going to go home. We have to remember that Hamas are never going to give all the hostages back. ever. It's just never going to happen because that's their final card. We have to understand that and we have to know that. And as painful as that is, we have to come with that mindset that every person who comes home is an absolute miracle. And so we don't know if there's going to be a negotiation deal, but we do know that Hamas are looking much more likely to provide us hostages now that there's no aid going in and the military activity in Gaza has increased and increased and increased and increased. In other things that people are protesting about here in Israel, because people love to protest, the Haredim, the Orthodox, and the good news is that the budget has finally passed. Now, in Israel, the way it works is that if the budget isn't passed by a certain date, the government automatically falls apart and we have to go to elections. That's what happened in those. Remember, we've had a few times that's happened. The problem is that we have so many different groups that have different financial needs within the coalition that to pass the budget is really, really, really complicated. And therefore, we're seeing an expansion of spending, which is just not in place. And the system's honestly kind of broken. But the Haredim were threatening to some degree, saying that they were not going to support the budget if the government doesn't sort out the draft issue. We've touched upon the draft issue a little bit here, and I want to be very clear because in my past episodes, it might not have sounded this way. I am very, very against the Haredim not contributing during this war. I think it's an atrocity. It's unacceptable. And as the religious group and those people who live by the Torah, the Bible that I believe in so strongly, it's our obligation to support and to fight and to do everything to keep the Jewish people safe. Again, a discussion for another time, but I am totally against it. I just happen to think that the way that we're trying to deal with it right now is just not going to work. And since it's not going to work and we actually need a long-term solution, let's try and think of productive solutions instead of hating on the Haredim more and more in the media. That's my personal opinion. But anyway, they were threatening because there's a draft law out there. They're trying to get thousands of Haredim to join the army because you might have seen this in the headlines. 80% of reservists are answering to reserve calls, but not nearly as much as is needed. And this war is going to continue. We're in an extreme war. I mean, war has started back up north with Hezbollah, as we've seen, and the Houthis are attacking, and we're back in Gaza. And who knows what's going to happen with Syria because things are escalating over there as well. And so we need more manpower. And so the Haredim was basically saying, we're not going to support the budget if the draft law isn't sorted out. And Netanyahu said to them, back off, let's give it a few months. So they went to their rabbis, as the Haredim do, and the rabbis said, okay, we will wait until Shavuot, which is in a few weeks' time. And if by that point we haven't sorted out the draft law, we will leave the coalition, which will lead to problems in the government, but it doesn't mean that the government's going to fall apart and we're not going to go to elections. So that is really good news and exciting. The budget has finally passed. That's a summary on our main deep dives, and we've got a lot more headlines going on this week. I mean, we've had terror attacks. We've had the Anti-Semitism conference. I don't know if you've heard about it, which was super controversial because they invited people from the right-wing denominations, which is just crazy because honestly, look, at the end of the day, if you want to solve anti-Semitism, you need Jewish people from the right, you need Jewish people from the left. We just have to stop with this inability to hear other people's opinions. But that was crazy this week in Jerusalem. We had lots of people come in. It was exciting. It was full of adrenaline. And hopefully we will somehow be able to fight together against this craziness that is anti-Semitism. The PA apparently has cancelled the Pay for Slay program. And when I say apparently, I mean it is actually not true, even though the headlines are all talking about it. And we will be doing a proper deep dive into that next week. So stay tuned and come see us here next Monday. We've got the Houthis who are still firing ballistic missiles at us left, right, and center. We've got sad news that Elise Stefanik is no longer going to be the ambassador to the UN, and not because she's out of the government, don't worry. Do you remember this amazing lady who called out the heads of the university campuses for anti-Semitism? Anyway, she was supposed to go to the UN and represent us, which would have been amazing, but Trump needs her in America, so we're going to have a new representative soon. We're waiting to hear who that's going to be. We've got horrible stuff like videos of Arabs attacking mezuzahs as they try and defile what's most important to us. And we've got obviously more police and Ben Gvir drama and reform drama and protest drama with some head of the protest sexually attacking one of the female soldiers. I mean, we've got a lot happening here in Israel, but there's just not enough time to deep dive into all of it. I want to finish on this one note because I think this is an absolutely amazing, amazing image that I saw this week. So you've heard of The Economist, the magazine. I want to show these two images, one from a few months ago and one from now. We've got Israel's alone a few months ago versus Israel's hubris. And I just love this image. Look, this is what we're doing. We're rebuilding the land. We're united. I mean, I don't know if they meant this in the image, but so many different flags across so many different people, so many different representations on our land. We are going to be okay. That's what I want to remind you all. We are going to be okay. We are going to be united. The majority of us our center. The majority of us want the same things. We just don't know how to talk it out properly, and we're going to figure it out. Okay, so as we wrap up this episode, I just want to remind you all that I want to hear your questions. Next week, we're going to be choosing a question of the week from somebody and talking about it. So don't forget to submit it. It'll be available today on my Instagram, Meira K Official, and we will be talking more about the Pay for Slay program, which is absolute insanity. And once again, thank you for being here with me as we talk about everything that you just won't see on the mainstream media. I'm Meira, and I'll see you next time.